Alright, let's talk about the journalistic approach to Scripture. When we think of a journalist, we think of somebody who closely observes, closely researches things so that they can report on them. When we talk about the purpose of the journalistic approach in Scripture, it's kind of the same thing. The journalistic approach is a way of helping us more closely observe the text. It keeps us from just reading over it quickly and not delving into it. The way it works is we're going to do the same things that a journalist does when a journalist is observing something to report on. Journalists are typically going to ask several questions: who, what, when, where, and why. Now, when we use the journalistic approach in our Bible study, we're going to do basically the same thing. We're going to ask those same type of questions: who, what, when, where, and why, as we read and observe the text. Now, one nice thing with the journalistic approach, some different Bible study methodologies or different approaches to Scripture work better with different types, different genres of Scripture than other ones do. The journalistic approach can work equally well with any of them. But we're going to do it slightly differently. So let's say, for example, we're reading a narrative text, a text that's telling a story. Well, what we're going to do, what I do when I use this approach, is I'll get out a little sheet of paper and I'll write down those 5 questions: who, what, when, where, and why. And as I'm reading the narrative, I'm going to be looking to answer those questions. Who's involved in the story? And not just who are they, not just what their names are, but also what do I know about this person? For example, if I'm reading a story out of the Old Testament, who are the main characters? What do I know about them? What do I know about their relationships with each other? What do I know about anything in their history or in their future that may impact the way I look at this particular story? So I ask, first question is, who's involved? Second thing is, what are they doing? What activity is taking place? Who's doing what? When I look at the when, go to answer the one question, I try to put it in context. When is this particular story happening in the life of the characters? When is it happening in relation to other key events in their lives? When is it happening in relation to other key events in Scripture? What else is going on around them at this particular time? And when it comes to the where, I'm going to look for, where are these things happening? What country? What city? And is there anything else I know about this that may have an impact on the way I view the story? And then after I've gotten those factual questions, who, what, when, and where, I'm going to ask the next question, which is why, and this is where I start trying to analyze the story. Now, that's the way I'll approach it with a narrative. If I'm approaching it with a didactic or a teaching passage of Scripture, I'm going to do the same thing, only slightly differently. Let's say, for example, I'm taking one of the epistles. The who, in this case, is who's writing, who's speaking, and who are they writing to? And then what do I know about them? Kind of the same questions. What do I know about their relationship with each other? What do I know about the personal histories or destinies of both the speaker or the writer and the audience? What are the key points they're trying to communicate? When are they trying to do this? When is it, for example, if it's an epistle written to a specific church, do I know anything else that's going on in this church at this particular time? What can I find out about it? The where, typically, if you're dealing with an epistle or something like that, is fairly straightforward. Although in some cases, you may be looking at something like the book of Ephesians, and you can gather some other information about the church at Ephesus that can feed into that particular storyline. And then again, we end up with analyzing it by looking at the why. So those are the ways that I'll approach those particular questions in the journalistic approach to Scripture. When I do this, I'm writing out my answers as I'm going. So on my sheet of paper, I'll have a section for who, and I'll write down everything I can gather, everything I can observe about the who. I'll have a section for what, section for when, so on and so forth. And remember, the purpose here is to get us to closely observe the text. So we always want to deal with those who, what, and when, and where questions before we deal with the question of why. Because we observe and then we analyze. So that's how we use the journalistic approach. It's an approach I've used multiple times, a lot of different times. It used to be one of my primary Bible study methods before I discovered there were other approaches to Scripture I could use as well. and has always been very, very fruitful to me. And a couple of passages you can work with to do some practicing with it. Judges chapter 6 through 8, the story of Gideon. The book of Colossians, the Judges one is a great one to look at applying this approach to a narrative passage of Scripture. The book of Colossians is a great one for applying this approach to a epistle, more of a didactic genre of Scripture. So, a couple of things to keep in mind. You can do this a couple of different ways. Both of these are fairly long passages of Scripture, so you can read the entire passage and you can deal with the entire passage as a whole, or you can deal with it chapter by chapter. So deal with Judges 6, and then Judges 7, and then Judges 8, and as you do the subsequent chapters, the information that you gathered from your previous chapters can then roll into the next ones. So when I'm working on Judges 6, I'm looking at the who being Gideon. When I look at Judges 8, the who is still Gideon, but now I can pull in information on the who that I pulled from those other two chapters. So hopefully that gives you some ideas for the journalistic approach to Scripture.